All right, let's dive into one of the, well, I think it's safe to say, most influential books ever written.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The Bible. And
we'll be focusing on the King James Version.
Yeah, the King James Version. We're going to be looking at that today. You know, it's divided into two parts, right?
Well, of course. The Old Testament and the New Testament.
Right, Old Testament, New Testament.
Right.
But have you ever thought about, like, why is it structured that way? You know, what makes all these stories and laws and, you know, the poetry and prophecy, what makes it so interesting that people keep coming back to it for centuries?
It really is fascinating.
It is.
The Old Testament,
Yeah.
which we'll focus on for this part of the deep dive.
Right.
It lays the groundwork for understanding the beliefs and practices of the Israelites.
Right.
You know, they saw themselves as God's chosen people.
Yeah, yeah.
And their story, well, it's anything but simple.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking creation, floods, kings,
Powerful king.
powerful kings, that's it.
Yeah.
And even a strong man named Samson, you know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Samson. With the hair.
whose strength was tied to his hair.
Yeah.
Right? It's a narrative woven through with triumphs and failures,
Yeah.
obedience and rebellion, you know.
Yeah.
Themes that, well, I think they resonate with us even today.
Absolutely. Still apply. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Genesis, the book of beginnings. It all starts with Adam and Eve
Right.
in the Garden of Eden.
Paradise.
A paradise. Right. Everything's perfect.
Right.
Well, except there was that one tree.
Yeah.
The forbidden tree.
The tree of knowledge of good and evil.
That's it. You know the story. They eat the fruit and things change.
They
But
do.
it's more than just breaking a rule, right?
Yeah.
What's the message here? What does it tell us about human nature?
Well, this story kind of sets the stage for, well, I think for the entire biblical narrative.
Okay.
You see, Adam and Eve's choice to eat from the forbidden tree introduces this core concept of free will, temptation, and the consequences of our actions.
Right.
I mean, they were given paradise. But, you know, their desire for knowledge led them to disobey.
Yeah.
It's a powerful exploration of that inner struggle
Yeah.
between what we want and what we're responsible for.
For sure. And the consequences were significant.
Oh, yeah.
Thorns and thistles making life difficult. Toiling for food, you know, that becomes a daily struggle. And then, well, death enters the world.
Right.
Paradise lost.
Paradise lost.
But God doesn't abandon humanity, even after this.
Right.
And we see this with the story of Noah.
Noah and the flood.
And the flood, right?
Yeah.
A total reset.
It is. God makes a covenant with Noah after the flood, promises never to destroy the world like that again. It's a symbol of a new beginning, you know, a chance for humanity to start over.
Yeah.
And this idea of a covenant,
Okay.
this binding agreement between God and his people, that's crucial, I think, to understanding, well, the whole Old Testament, really.
Whole Old Testament. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we have the Tower of Babel. Another story where humans kind of overreach. They're trying to build a tower to reach heaven, but God disrupts their plans by confusing all their languages.
Right.
And this leads to communication breaking down, and then people are scattered all across the earth.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, you know, what are the limits of human ambition? Like, what happens when our aspirations clash with a divine plan?
It's interesting, isn't it? The story of the Tower of Babel. Well, it explores the consequences of pride
Okay.
and the desire for power.
Yeah.
You know, it highlights the importance of humility and acknowledging, I guess, a power greater than ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we move on to Abraham and his descendants.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting. We encounter sacrifice and rivalry, but ultimately reconciliation.
Yeah.
Abraham almost sacrifices his son Isaac because God asked him to.
Right.
Then there's this rivalry between Jacob and Esau, but Jacob eventually makes peace with his brother. These are stories that resonate across cultures and time, don't they?
Absolutely. They delve into the complexities of faith, family dynamics, and the human condition.
Yeah.
And it's through these stories that this idea of a chosen people starts to take shape.
Okay.
God chooses Abraham
Right.
and makes a covenant with him, promises to bless his descendants,
Yeah.
make them a great nation.
And that concept of chosen people leads us to Moses in the Exodus. I mean, this is one of the most dramatic stories in the Old Testament. We see the Israelites escaping slavery in Egypt,
Right.
the parting of the Red Sea,
Oh, yeah?
receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai.
It's a story of liberation,
Yeah.
but also about law
Yeah.
and how a nation's identity is formed.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the Exodus, I mean, it's pivotal in Israelite history.
Right,
It is.
yeah.
It's not just physically escaping slavery.
Right.
It's a spiritual liberation.
Right.
And the 10 Commandments, which were given on Mount Sinai, they become this foundation for their law and their relationship with God.
Exactly. It establishes a framework, for their lives.
Yeah.
Ethical, social, and religious.
Right. And let's not forget, all those laws in Exodus and Leviticus, there are rules about, pretty much everything.
There are.
From rituals of cleanliness to what you could and couldn't eat. These weren't just random rules.
No, they weren't.
They seem to reflect a deeper understanding of order and holiness.
Yeah, you're exactly right. These laws, they served a purpose beyond just, dictating behavior.
Yeah.
They were supposed to shape the Israelites into a holy people.
Okay.
Set apart and dedicated to God.
Yeah.
The dietary laws, for example. They weren't just about health. They were about purity and separation from other cultures.
Interesting. So they escape Egypt, they receive the law, and then it's time to conquer the promised land.
Right.
And Joshua enters the story.
He does.
There's the story of Rahab, who hides the Israelite spies in Jericho. Right.
And then the Battle of Jericho, where the walls came tumbling down. Talk about a dramatic entrance.
Right. This is where we see that cyclical pattern emerge.
Okay.
Obedience to God brings prosperity. Disobedience leads to hardship.
Yeah.
Israelites are victorious when they're faithful.
Right.
But when they stray from God's commands, things don't go well.
Right.
And this pattern, it becomes a recurring theme throughout their history.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And eventually they decide they want a king.
A king.
Yeah. Just like all the other nations.
Okay.
So Saul is the first king of Israel.
The first king.
But his reign, it ends tragically because he disobeys God.
All right.
And then we have David, the shepherd boy turned king.
Shepherd boy.
He's described as a man after God's own heart. But what does that even mean?
Well, was he perfect? David's story, it's fascinating because it challenges this notion of perfect leadership.
Okay.
He was a man of great courage and faith.
But he was also, he was deeply flawed.
Right.
You remember, his adultery with Bathsheba.
Right.
And then the, subsequent cover up.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even those chosen for greatness are capable of terrible mistakes.
Right.
And the consequences of those mistakes, they can be far reaching.
Yeah, they can be. So David establishes a dynasty.
Right.
But then things get messy again after his son Solomon takes over.
Solomon.
Yeah. The kingdom is divided, and we end up with two rival kingdoms.
Okay.
Israel and Judah. So what led to this division? Was it inevitable?
Well, I don't think it was just about, political maneuvering. It was a symptom of a deeper spiritual crisis.
Oh, okay.
Solomon, despite all his wisdom, he strayed from God's commands, and the nation followed suit.
Right.
Idolatry became rampant.
Okay.
And the prophets, they were God's spokesmen.
Right.
They started to warn the people, to turn back to their relationship with God.
Yeah. But those warnings, they went unheeded, didn't they?
They did.
It doesn't end well for either kingdom.
No, it doesn't. Both kingdoms fall eventually.
Right.
And the people are exiled to Babylon.
Yeah.
It's a tragic end to, what began with so much promise.
Yeah.
But the exile, it becomes a defining moment.
Okay.
In their history. It forces them to, to confront their past, their failures, the consequences of turning away from God.
Right. But there's a glimmer of hope, right?
Yeah.
They eventually return from exile and rebuild the temple.
Right.
It's a story of resilience and the enduring power of faith, even when facing, devastation.
It is.
But that's a story for another time.
Indeed. The return from exile, it marks a new chapter.
Yeah.
A story of rebuilding, and spiritual renewal.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the Old Testament, it doesn't end on a triumphant note.
Right.
It leaves us with a sense of anticipation.
Okay.
A longing for something more. And that longing, that yearning for restoration and redemption, that's where the New Testament begins.
That's a great point. So that sense of anticipation, that longing for something more, that's what leads us to the New Testament, right? It's like the second act.
It is.
Of this epic drama, building on what was laid out in the Old Testament.
Absolutely. And at the center of the New Testament stands Jesus. A figure who claimed to be the fulfillment of those ancient prophecies.
Right.
the Messiah, the one the Jewish people had been waiting for.
For so long.
For so long, yeah. And for Christians, well, he's not just a historical figure.
Right.
He's the Son of God, the bridge between humanity and the divine.
So the New Testament, I mean, it's not just a continuation of the story.
Right.
It's a radical shift in perspective.
It is.
It reveals, or it claims to reveal, the ultimate purpose of the covenant.
Yeah.
The fulfillment of God's promises. And it all revolves around the life, the teachings, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, where do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Well, a good starting point would be the Gospels.
Okay.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These 4 books, well, they each offer a unique portrait of Jesus.
Okay.
Like different facets of a diamond.
Yeah.
Each reflecting light in its own way.
It's fascinating that we have 4 different accounts of Jesus' life.
Right.
Matthew presents him as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy.
Right.
Mark emphasizes his actions and miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Luke highlights his compassion for the marginalized.
Right.
And John focuses on his divinity. It's like we're getting 4 different perspectives on the same, extraordinary person.
It's almost like they're inviting us to look at Jesus from these multiple angles.
Okay.
To grapple with the complexity of his identity and mission.
Right.
And by weaving together these different threads, we can begin to appreciate the tapestry of his life and teachings.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. What stands out to you from the Gospels? What are some of the key takeaways that have really resonated with you?
One thing that's always struck me is how radical Jesus' teachings were.
Okay. Yeah.
He challenged the religious and social norms of his time.
Right.
He was calling people to love their enemies.
Really?
To forgive those who wronged them, to care for the least among them.
Wow.
His message was, a message of love.
Okay.
Compassion. And a complete transformation of the heart.
A complete transformation.
Yeah.
Wow. And he didn't just talk about it, right?
I lived it.
He lived it. The Gospels are filled with stories of him healing the sick, raising the dead, calming the storms.
Right.
I mean, these miracles weren't just spectacles, were they?
No, they pointed to something deeper. Yeah. The miracles, they're a testament to Jesus' authority and compassion. They demonstrate his power over nature, over illness, even death.
Wow.
But they also reveal, I think, his deep empathy for human suffering.
Okay.
And his willingness to meet people at their point of need.
Right. Right. But the Gospels, I mean, they're not all sunshine and roses, right?
They're not.
Jesus faces betrayal, he suffers, and ultimately he dies, brutally on the cross.
Right.
How do Christians reconcile that with the idea of a Messiah who comes to save the world?
Well, that's the paradox at the heart of Christianity.
Okay.
The crucifixion of Jesus. I mean, this moment of profound darkness, despair, it becomes the turning point in the story.
Okay.
You see, for Christians, it's not the end.
Right.
It's the beginning. They believe that Jesus' death was a sacrifice.
Okay.
An atonement for the sins of humanity.
Right.
And his resurrection, 3 days later, that's the ultimate victory over death.
Wow.
Offering the promise of eternal life to those who believe.
So the resurrection, I mean, this is the cornerstone of the Christian faith.
It is.
It's what transforms a tragic execution into a message of hope and redemption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the event that changed everything. Transformed this small group of grieving followers into a movement that spread like wildfire.
Wow.
Across the Roman Empire and, eventually throughout the world.
Wow, throughout the world. And that's where the book of Acts comes in, right?
Right. It picks up where the Gospels leave off.
Yeah.
It tells the story of the early church and how Christianity spread.
Okay.
I mean, it's a wild ride.
Really?
Full of boldness, persecution, and miracles.
Wow. I mean, Acts is a testament to the power of the Holy Spirit then.
It is.
Which empowered the disciples to preach the gospel, perform miracles, and overcome, incredible obstacles.
Yeah, they faced opposition from, both religious and political authorities.
Right.
But their message just kept spreading.
Yeah.
Attracting people from all walks of life.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how Acts shows how the early church developed. From a small group of Jewish followers to a movement that embraced Gentiles and spread across cultures.
Yeah, it highlights the challenges and debates.
Yeah.
As they grappled with questions of identity, doctrine, and how to live out their faith.
Yeah.
In a complex world.
A complex world, yeah. And then we have the epistles.
The epistle.
This collection of letters written by various apostles.
Primarily Paul.
Primarily Paul, yeah. To these early Christian communities that were scattered all throughout the Roman Empire. These letters address specific challenges, theological questions, and practical matters of faith.
Right? It's like getting a glimpse into their everyday lives, their struggles, their triumphs.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the epistles, well, they offer invaluable insights into how Christian thought and practice developed.
Right. They tackle issues, like what is salvation? What's the role of the Holy Spirit?
Okay.
Even practical advice on how to live a Christian life.
Yeah.
In a pagan culture.
In a pagan culture, right. Paul's letters, well, they're considered foundational to Christian theology, aren't they?
They are.
I mean, he delves into these concepts like salvation by grace through faith, the nature of the church, and the ethical implications of belief. I mean, they can be a bit challenging to read, but they're packed with theological depth.
They are. And, they played a crucial role in shaping Christian doctrine.
Right.
And establishing the framework for understanding the relationship between the Old and New Testament.
Right. Okay, so we've got the Gospels, Acts, the Epistles. What else? Oh, we can't forget about the last book.
Revelation.
It's a bit of a wild ride, isn't it?
It is.
Filled with symbolic imagery and apocalyptic visions. Some people, they find it terrifying. Others find it inspiring. How do we even begin to understand it?
Well, Revelation's a book that's it's fascinated and perplexed readers for centuries.
Yeah, it has.
It's a book of prophecy, visions, and, symbolic language.
Yeah.
That points to the ultimate triumph of God over evil. And, the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth.
Okay. So it's definitely a book that sparks a lot of debate.
Oh, yeah.
And different interpretations.
Yeah.
Some see it as a literal prediction of future events.
Right.
While others view it as more symbolic, a portrayal of the spiritual realities of good and evil.
Right.
The battle between God and Satan. And, the ultimate hope of redemption.
Right. However you interpret it, Revelation is a powerful reminder.
Okay.
That, that this earthly story isn't the end.
Right.
It points to a future reality where God's justice and love will reign supreme.
Wow.
And it offers a message of hope and encouragement to those who are suffering and facing persecution.
So from Genesis to Revelation, we've journeyed through the Bible.
We have.
We've covered creation, covenants, exile, redemption, and the promise of a new heaven and a new earth.
That's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in. It's incredible to think about. I mean, just the sheer scope of the Bible.
It is.
The stories, the laws, the poetry, the prophecies. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What's the main takeaway you hope listeners will get from our deep dive today?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that the Bible, regardless of your personal beliefs, it offers a profound exploration of the human experience.
Right.
It grapples with those big questions.
Yeah.
Our relationship with the divine.
Yeah.
Our capacity for both good and evil.
Right.
The search for meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
These are questions that have resonated with people for centuries.
Absolutely.
And they continue to challenge us even today.
They do. You've mentioned this idea of covenant several times.
Right.
Throughout our conversation, it seems like a recurring theme that runs through both the Old and New Testaments. Why is this concept so central to understanding the Bible?
Well, covenant is, it's the foundation of the relationship between God and humanity.
Okay.
In the Bible.
Yeah.
It's not just a contract. It's a binding promise, a commitment of love and faithfulness.
Right.
In the Old Testament, we see God making these covenants with Noah, Abraham, Moses, and the Israelites. And these covenants, they come with blessings and obligations.
Yeah.
Highlighting, this reciprocal nature of the relationship.
So how does the New Testament build on this idea of covenant?
Well, Christians believe that Jesus, he ushered in a new covenant.
Okay.
Covenant of grace and forgiveness.
Right.
You see, his death on the cross, it's seen as the ultimate sacrifice.
Oh, okay.
Fulfilling the requirements of the old covenant.
Right.
And opening the way for a restored relationship with God.
Yeah.
This new covenant, it's not based on strictly adhering to the law.
Okay.
But on faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
And the transformative power of his love and sacrifice.
That makes me think about all the different interpretations of the Bible.
Yeah.
It seems like a text that invites diverse perspectives and ongoing dialogue.
It does.
So how can we navigate all these different interpretations and find meaning, for ourselves?
That's the beauty of the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a living text.
Okay.
It speaks to people, across cultures and time periods.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to interpret it. It's meant to be studied, wrestled with, discussed.
Right.
I think the key is to approach it with humility.
Okay.
A willingness to listen and an open heart.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, to seek different perspectives and to allow the text to challenge, your assumptions.
Right.
As we wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, what stories or themes resonated most with you personally? Was there anything that surprised you or made you see things in a new light?
I'm always drawn to the stories of resilience and redemption.
Yeah.
The return from exile.
Right.
The parable of the prodigal son.
Uh-huh.
The woman, caught in adultery who was forgiven by Jesus.
Yeah.
These stories, they remind us that no matter how far we stray, no matter how broken we feel, there's always a possibility for a new beginning.
Yeah.
For healing and restoration.
I think that's a powerful message to hold on to.
Yeah.
Especially in a world that can often feel, chaotic and uncertain.
It is.
The Bible, with all its complexities and challenges, it ultimately points us towards a hope that, that transcends our circumstances. It invites us to grapple with those big questions.
Yeah.
To engage in, a lifelong process of learning and discovery.
And to find meaning and purpose in the midst of our human journey.
Absolutely.
So, as we conclude this deep dive, I encourage you to keep exploring, to keep asking those questions, and to keep allowing, the ancient wisdom of the Bible to speak to your heart.
I think that's a great way to end it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. That sense of anticipation you mentioned, that longing for something more, that's what leads us to the New Testament, right? It's like the second act in this epic drama,
right,
building on what was laid out in the Old Testament.
Absolutely. And at the center of the New Testament, stands Jesus.
Jesus.
A figure who claimed to be, the fulfillment of those ancient prophecies.
Right.
The Messiah, the one the Jewish people have been waiting for so long.
For so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for Christians, he's not just a historical figure.
Right.
He's the Son of God. The bridge between, humanity and the divine.
So the New Testament, it's not just, a continuation of the story. It's a radical shift in perspective.
It is.
It reveals or claims to reveal the ultimate purpose of the covenant, the fulfillment of God's promises.
Right.
And it all revolves around the life, the teachings, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. Where do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Well, a good starting point would be the Gospels.
Okay.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
These 4 books each offer, a kind of a unique portrait of Jesus.
Okay.
Different facets of a diamond, each reflecting light in its own way.
It's fascinating that we have 4 different accounts of Jesus' life.
It is.
Matthew presents him as the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. Mark emphasizes his actions and miracles. Luke highlights his compassion for the marginalized. And John focuses on his divinity. It's like getting, 4 different perspectives on the same extraordinary person.
It's almost as if they're inviting us to look at Jesus from multiple angles. To grapple with the complexity of his identity and mission.
Right.
And by weaving together these different threads, I think we can begin to appreciate the tapestry of his life and teachings.
That's a great way to put it. What stands out to you from the Gospels? What are some of the key takeaways that have really resonated with you?
One thing that's always struck me is how radical Jesus' teachings were.
Okay, yeah.
He challenged the religious and social norms of his day.
Yeah.
Calling people to love their enemies, to forgive those who wrong them, to care for the least among them.
Wow.
His message was one of love, compassion, and a complete transformation of the heart.
A complete transformation?
Yeah.
Wow. And he didn't just talk about it.
Right. He lived it.
The Gospels are filled with stories of him healing the sick, raising the dead, calming the storms. These miracles, they weren't just spectacles, were they?
No. They pointed to something deeper. The miracles, they're a powerful testament to Jesus' authority and compassion. They demonstrate his power over nature, illness, even over death itself.
Wow.
But they also reveal, his deep empathy for human suffering and his willingness to meet people at their point of need.
Right. But the Gospels, they're not all sunshine and roses, are they?
No, they're not.
Jesus faces betrayal, suffering, and ultimately a brutal death on the cross.
Right.
So how do they reconcile that with this idea of a Messiah who comes to save the world?
Well, that's the paradox at the heart of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
The crucifixion of Jesus. This moment of, profound darkness and despair, it becomes the turning point in the story. You see, for Christians, it's not the end. It's the beginning.
Okay.
They believe that Jesus' death was a sacrifice, an atonement for the sins of humanity. And his resurrection 3 days later, well, that's the ultimate victory over death, offering the promise of eternal life to those who believe.
So the resurrection is the cornerstone of the Christian faith.
It is.
It's what transforms, a tragic execution into this message of hope and redemption.
Exactly. It's the event that changed everything. It transformed this small group of grieving followers into a movement that spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire and eventually throughout the world.
Wow, throughout the world.
Yeah.
And that's where the book of Acts comes in, right?
Right. It picks up where the Gospels leave off. It tells the story of the early church and how Christianity spread. It's a wild ride full of boldness, persecution, and miracles.
Wow, a wild ride. So Acts is a testament to the power of the Holy Spirit then.
It is.
Which empowered the disciples to preach the gospel, to perform miracles, and to overcome incredible obstacles.
Right. They faced opposition from both religious and political authorities, but their message, it just kept spreading, attracting people from all walks of life.
And it's fascinating how Acts shows the development of the early church, from the small group of Jewish followers to a movement that embraces Gentiles and spreads across cultural boundaries.
Right. It highlights the challenges and debates within the early church as they grappled with questions of identity, doctrine, and how to live out their faith in a complex world.
In a complex world.
Yeah.
And then we have the epistles.
The epistles.
This collection of letters written by various apostles, primarily Paul.
Right.
To these early Christian communities that were scattered all over the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
These letters, they addressed specific challenges, theological questions, and practical matters of faith.
Right. It's like getting, a glimpse into their everyday lives,
Mm-hmm.
Their struggles, their triumphs.
Yeah. So the epistles, they offer these invaluable insights into, how Christian thought and practice developed.
They do. They tackle issues ranging from the nature of salvation to the role of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
They even offer practical advice on how to live a Christian life in a pagan culture.
Right. And Paul's letters in particular, they're considered foundational to Christian theology.
Yeah.
He delves into concepts like, salvation by grace through faith, the nature of the church, the ethical implications of belief. They can be a bit challenging to read, but they're packed with theological depth.
They are. And they played a crucial role in shaping Christian doctrine and establishing the framework for understanding the relationship between the Old and New Testaments.
Okay. So we've got the Gospels, Acts, and the Epistles.
Right.
What else is there? Oh, we can't forget about that last book.
Revelation.
It's a bit of a wild ride, isn't it?
It is.
Filled with symbolic imagery and these apocalyptic visions. Some people find it terrifying, others find it inspiring. How do we even begin to understand it?
Well, Revelation is a book that's, it's fascinated and perplexed readers for centuries.
Yeah, it has.
It's a book of prophecy, visions, and this symbolic language that points to, the ultimate triumph of God over evil and the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth.
Okay. It's definitely a book that sparks a lot of debate and different interpretations. Some see it as this literal prediction of future events, while others, they view it more symbolically, as a portrayal of the spiritual realities of good and evil.
Right.
The battle between God and Satan and, the ultimate hope of redemption.
Right. However you interpret it, Revelation is a powerful reminder that this earthly story, this isn't the end. It points to a future reality where God's justice and love will reign supreme. And it offers, a message of hope and encouragement to those who are suffering and and facing persecution.
So from Genesis to Revelation, we've journeyed through the Bible.
We have.
Covered creation, covenants, exile, redemption, and the promise of a new heaven and a new earth. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's incredible to think about. I mean, just the sheer scope of the Bible.
It is.
The stories, the laws, the poetry, the prophecies. You know, we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm sure we've only scratched the surface.
I think that's right.
What's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from our deep dive today?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the Bible, regardless of your personal beliefs, offers a profound exploration of, the human experience. It grapples with those big questions, our relationship with the divine, our capacity for good and evil, the search for meaning and purpose. And these are questions that have resonated with people for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they continue to challenge us, even today.
They do. You've mentioned this idea of covenant a few times throughout our conversation. It seems like a recurring theme, that weaves its way through both the Old and New Testaments. Why is this concept, why is it so central to understanding the Bible?
Well, covenant it's the foundation of the relationship between God and humanity in the Bible. It's not just a contract, it's a promise, a commitment of love and faithfulness. And in the Old Testament, we see God making these covenants with Noah, with Abraham, with Moses, and the Israelites. And these covenants, while they come with blessings and obligations, highlighting this, this reciprocal nature of the relationship.
So how does the New Testament, how does it build on this idea of covenant?
Well, Christians believe that Jesus, he ushered in a new covenant. Covenant of grace and forgiveness. You see, his death on the cross is seen as the ultimate sacrifice, fulfilling those requirements of the old covenant and, opening the way for a restored relationship with God. And this new covenant is not based on, on strictly adhering to the law, but on faith in Jesus and the transformative power of his love and sacrifice.
That makes me think about all the different interpretations of the Bible. It seems like a text that invites a lot of diverse perspectives and ongoing dialogue. So how can we navigate all these different interpretations and find meaning for ourselves?
Well, that's the beauty of the Bible. It's a living text. It speaks to people across cultures and across time periods. There's no one right way to interpret it. It's meant to be, studied, wrestled with, discussed. I think the key is to approach it with humility, willingness to listen, and an open heart. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to seek out different perspectives, and, to allow the text to challenge your assumptions.
As we wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, what stories or themes, resonated most with you personally? Was there anything that surprised you or made you see things in a new light?
I'm always drawn to the stories of resilience and redemption. The return from exile, the parable of the prodigal son, the woman caught in adultery who's forgiven by Jesus. These stories, they remind us that no matter how far we stray, no matter how broken we feel, there's always a possibility for a new beginning, for healing and restoration.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful message to hold on to, especially in a world that can often feel, chaotic and uncertain. The Bible, with all its complexities and challenges, ultimately points us towards a hope that transcends our circumstances. It invites us to grapple with those big questions, to engage in a lifelong process of learning and discovery, and to find meaning and purpose in the midst of our human journey. So as we conclude our deep dive today, I encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep allowing the ancient wisdom of the Bible to speak to your heart.
Well said. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.